Hello friends. In today's episode, we will share the story of George Stinney, the youngest person in the history to be sentenced to death. He was wrongly found guilty of the death of two children, Betty Binnicker and Mary Emma Timms. Betty June Binnicker was 11 years old. Living with her family in South Carolina, Betty spent most of the day outside playing with her friends. One of her best friends was 7 years old Mary Emma Timms. They would go out after school and wouldn't come home until dark. In March 1944, they went out to play again. Their greatest pastime was to go to the countryside to pick flowers and ride their bicycles. On that dark day, they had planned a little trip to nearby Alcolu. It was March and it was very cold. Betty and Mary said goodbye to their families for the last time and set off. Mary and Betty did not return home that day. Their parents waited for their daughters to come home in the evening, but it was already dark and there was still no knock at the door. Mary's parents went to Betty's house when the clock struck 9 p.m. Mary had been with Betty the last time. Maybe they had gone to Betty's house together. When the family went to Betty's house, they were shocked to find out that Betty had not come home yet, and Betty's parents had thought that their daughter was at Mary's house. Both families realized that something was wrong. They went to their nearby acquaintances' houses, but no one had seen the girls that day. It was obvious that the girls were missing. The neighbors joined the search operation and dozens of people started looking for the girls. After their search yielded no results, the families notified police at 11 p.m. One team met with the girls' parents and asked them if they had seen anything suspicious, while another team searched the area with the help of dogs. Both parents said that their daughters were happy at home and that they would never try to run away from home and that something had definitely happened to them. It had been 2 days since Mary and Betty had left their homes. Police interviewed several eyewitnesses. One of the eyewitnesses said that he had seen Mary and Betty walking around Alcolu, but he did not see anything suspicious. Another witness said that he saw Mary and Betty talking to a small black teenager. On the day they disappeared, Mary and Betty chatted with the teenager. The boy's name was George Stinney, and he was only 13 years old. The police immediately went to George's house and handcuffed him and brought him to the police station. When George arrived at the police station, he looked around timidly. What was he doing here? He didn't understand anything. The policemen didn't give him any explanation when they brought him to the station. Mary and Betty were found some time later by a priest named Francis Batson. They were both in a ditch. George was interrogated by the cops for 2 hours. At the end of the interrogation, the cops said that George had confessed to everything. He was the perpetrator of the girls' deaths. But what had he done with the girls? According to the police report, he killed both girls and dumped them into a ditch. George Stinney lived in Alcolu, South Carolina. At the time, Alcolu was divided into black and white communities. A railroad track, not a wall, separated the two sides. Across the railroad track lived the black community, and whites did not easily cross into the area. George had 2 older brothers and 2 sisters. The older brother was brought to the police station on the same day and questioned, but was later released because he was found to be innocent. George had the help of his sister Aim in the case of Mary and Betty. The two of them did it. That was according to police records. Sister Aim and asked them where they could find a local flower. The only contact between George and the girls was in that 1-minute moment. According to many sources, George was not allowed to see his family after arriving at the police station, and according to some sources, he only saw his family once. He remained in jail until George Stinney's trial. The cops gave him very little food and left him without water for days. Several cops allegedly said they would give him food if he confessed. George's days in jail were very difficult. In the following days, it was alleged that George had a very aggressive personality and had recently stabbed a friend at school. George's teacher, a black woman, was the one who made the allegation. The story soon became widespread in South Carolina. George's family was forced to leave their neighborhood, and after a while they were kicked out of their home. The sawmill where George's father worked fired him. Their safety was in jeopardy. Even the police, their only refuge, threatened them. George waited 81 days for his trial. George was interrogated without a lawyer. He was not allowed to bring one. On the day of the trial, a lawyer was appointed to George as a formality. There was a piece of paper in front of the judge with George's confession in his own handwriting. There was no other evidence against George. Everything was because of George's conversation with the girls that day, which lasted maybe not even a minute. On the day of the trial, not a single black person was allowed into the courtroom, while there were tens of white people in the courtroom. George's family was also denied access to the courtroom. George's lawyer was Charles Plowden, a tax broker, who watched calmly as 3 policemen told him that George had confessed to everything. He did not cross-examine the witnesses. After deliberating for less than 10 minutes, the jury found Stinney guilty of murder. Judge Philip H. Stoll sentenced Stinney to death by electrocution. George's execution was only 2 days away. After the trial, George was sent to Columbia Prison to await his execution day. According to some sources, his family was allowed to see George after the trial, and they came to the prison and spent about half an hour with George, taking a last look at him and talking to him for the last time. George Stinney was executed on June 16, 1944. He was brought to the execution chamber of the prison at 7:30 a.m. He was so small that he almost disappeared in the electric chair. He was 5'5" tall and weighed 40 pounds at the time. The guards struggled for a long time to fix the mechanism on his head. George had gone through painful 83 days. His friends in prison said that George asked every day if he was going to be executed that day. Another prisoner, who spent 80 days with him, said that the police were violent and did everything they could to make him confess. Years later, a lawyer, Ray Chandler, looked into the case and said he would support the family. On October 25, 2013, George's family filed a new lawsuit. A hearing was held in January 2014, and new evidence was presented to the court. In December 2014, Judge Carmen Millen ruled that George was innocent, saying he had not received a fair trial and had received an inhumane sentence for a child of his age. The girl's family said the execution was controversial, but they never doubted George's guilt and were disappointed by the verdict.